All right, so our office accepted a meeting request with Rick Byers of Longevity Solutions Virginia and Dan Conquest, who's the realtor. This was on October 13th. They're under contract for the property at 31 Orchard Lane in Livingston. That's about 35 acres, and they're proposing to develop workforce housing, about 40 dwellings in a cluster style on small lots. Mr. Byers indicated he's worked with multiple localities, including Suffolk and most recently Fluvanna County, on updating their cluster ordinances to accommodate this type of housing, and that has been modeled in many localities in Virginia. We currently do not have any ordinance that would permit this scale or density of development. In your memo and on the screen, I made a little chart showing the options for something like this. In that first column, we have the proposed development, 40 dwelling units, single family, and a cluster style on a lot 35 acres, with I believe it's 5,000 to 9,000 square foot lots with public water and sewer. The closest ordinances we have would be either R2 residential zoning. I think about 3 acres of the front of this property is zoned R2. They could potentially rezone it, and that will only get them down to 10,000 square foot lots with public water and sewer. And we also have a current cluster ordinance, and you have to have a minimum lot size of 75 acres to even be considered for this. Again, the smallest lot size you could get out of that is 10,000 square feet at a density of 1 unit per 6.8 acres. And 40% of that 75 acres has to be reserved as some type of open space. So attached with your memo are Mr. Byers' email describing the project, the concept layout they submitted of the development, which is right here. And then a text document describing their request and why how amending our cluster ordinance would be beneficial. So staff is seeking guidance from the board regarding how to proceed. The board can either adopt the attached resolution, which would refer this topic to the planning commission for recommendation on drafting of a new ordinance to address this type of development, or you can just choose to keep the current ordinances in place.
I can't get a grip of where that is, for some reason.
Miss Tucker's house.
Yes, this is Ms. Tucker's
Ms.
house.
Tucker's
Miss Tucker's house is right there.
So, where's the Catholic Church?
On the other side.
That's up the hill. That's probably something up here. But that's Miss Tucker, Farm Bureau's right here.
So,
you go up to Green Acres.
The
right
cliffs, the rock cliffs are right behind that.
Yeah.
So there's space between Miss Tucker's house and her son's house.
Yeah, the lot goes up 35 acres.
And that's not mountainous,
It's pretty intense
It
topography.
gets steep at the back, but the front 3 acres are zoned for R2 residential.
and he owns this guy.
He's under contract. And he is here as well, if you have specific questions about it, but essentially what we're looking for today is, does the board want to refer this to the planning commission so we can draft an ordinance, or do you want to leave it the way it is with the?
Are we gonna be able to ask him questions about this now?
Well, he hasn't, we have to get the planning commission to present something before they can even do anything, right?
Correct. Right now, this is not something they would be able to apply for.
No, but, this one little picture doesn't give me any feeling for what kind of, like, for instance, the houses, what, prefab houses or stick-built houses?
So he can answer those types of questions, but at this time, we're just trying to figure out if the cluster style is an ordinance that the board wants to go after. It wouldn't be for this specific project, but it would be an ordinance for the whole county to consider for any future developments, not just this one. This would give them the avenue to apply, and then at that time, they would present all their application materials.
And then we'd be asking the planning commission to take a look at it and make a recommendation.
Correct. They would be drafting an ordinance and referring it back to you, public hearing on the new ordinance at both planning commission and the board of supervisors. And then that would allow them to apply. My guess would be likely a special use permit.
Yeah.
And then do the whole process for those specific applications.
So there would still be a special use permit process.
Right.
even if this did go through, which would be a couple months away from getting that done.
But I believe he does get into more specifics about this project in the email that he provided.
Let's have the applicant come up real quick. Introduce yourself and state your name and who you're with for the record. Or not applicant, you're not an applicant, you're a interest group of sorts.
Good afternoon. My name is Rick Byer with Longevity Solutions. I'm based out of Glen Allen. My company specializes in kind of a unique building business. We do a lot of work with the aging population as well as disabled population. But I've also been building in workforce housing since the 1980s. And personally, I've been a property owner in Nelson County for a little over 7 years and been visiting here for over 50 years. So this is my first foray from a business standpoint in Nelson County. I've come from a working class family, and I've always been a big proponent of workforce housing. And as we all know, that has become harder and harder to achieve nowadays, especially in the last several years with inflation and now with interest rates. We have a growing business community here in Nelson as well as other counties, towns, and cities in Virginia. But any of you that may own a business, it's almost impossible to find employees nowadays, and if employees don't have sufficient workforce housing, it just complicates that even more. So my proposal, I thought Lovingston would be a good area to build fee simple, stick-built, site-built homes, sub $300,000 price range. It would really serve two marketplaces, both workforce housing, but also the aging population, because really the houses are almost dual purpose. They're smaller, one level. We have an aging population that are living in larger homes, many times that are not very energy efficient. And the problem is they have no housing nowadays to transition lateral or down to, so they're staying in place, which is also reducing the available supply of housing for workforce. Traditionally, over the last 50 years, as the aging population progressed to move downward, those houses became available for the workforce, and those houses aren't available anymore because the aging is staying in place. This particular site came up. It does have some terrain and elevation. This is an initial sketch plan to try to figure out what we could do there. We not unlike the site y'all have across the street, still have some preliminary engineering work, and we need to look at rock formation and density, et cetera. This design it could change depending on how the feedback.
Sure.
My intention here, before we spend tens of thousands of dollars to find out whether we either have something or we have nothing at all there, was at least look at the cluster housing ordinance here, which I don't believe has not been used yet. Is that the feedback we had?
I believe it was used once, but then it was vacated later.
So I've been involved in cluster developments since the 1990s. I actually worked with the city of Suffolk in 1996 to craft their cluster home ordinance, and I actually developed the very first cluster home development in the city of Suffolk during that time period. Since then, I've worked in several more, and the cluster is a very popular tool now statewide and nationally. But I think the existing cluster ordinance as it sits today in Nelson County really is probably not been used for a reason. It's very, very restrictive. I'd like to see work hand in hand with planning and the board to try to see if we can tweak this cluster ordinance to actually make it more user-friendly and be adaptable, not just for my site, but any potential future developments. And some of those changes would be rather than pigeonholing it into only particular zonings, allowing it in some type of an overlay special use that would give you the power to apply that new cluster ordinance in various different properties, because what you're going to find as time progresses is sometimes these developments are going to be mixed use. You may have a mixture of different kinds of housing. You may have a Main Street type setting where you may have neighborhood businesses with residential on top, etc. And if that overlay were applied, it would give you much more flexibility to be able to use that. So, I'll open it up if you have any additional questions for me that I can try to answer.
So, and I think it's one thing for the board to kind of have an understanding. Once we approve the ordinance, he would still have to go through the special use permit process. So like, even if we do in a couple months approve a cluster zoning, those individuals, right, in all situations would have to still get approval by special use permit.
Yeah, I know that, and we've talked about cluster housing in Livingston for some time. And I've chided the building people in Nelson County about, you need to come up with an idea to make this work. And, you know, they have all sorts of reasons why it wouldn't work. Now, these lots are 50 by 100.
They're about average 7,000 to 8,000 square foot. They would probably be anywhere from 80 to 100 foot wide, 100 foot deep.
How big are these houses?
The houses typically we're talking about are probably beginning size range 1,250 to 1,450 square foot, or even 1 or 1.5.
Yeah, I've lived my whole life in a house that's 720 square feet. So I know, and with children, so it's possible. I know it's possible. But
Narrow footprints.
it has to be in a place that's livable, you know, parks and recreation areas.
What this type of development does, it intertwines open space throughout the development. We would obviously keep all the back adjacent where the elevations get really steep into the lead into open space, probably have some congregate picnic type covered picnic area.
The other thing that makes me curious and excited is the idea that these are stick-built houses. So you're going to employ carpenters to build them?
Oh yeah, the whole full spectrum. While I have experience
Why are you
in
able to-
modular housing, I haven't built modular housing in 15, 17 years. But everything we build is ground up site.
Do you have a company that builds them? You build them, or
Yes,
you
I'm a
hire?
general contractor, home builder, and I build homes from scratch of different sizes, shapes, different demographics. But I would say over a 38-year career span, most of my construction has been in the workforce.
I mean,
For instance, you know, Nelson County was an example of trickle-down economics, where Wintergreen was built. And most of my friends were carpenters and masons and made their living in that way. Would you have a program to train carpenters?
Well, it's
We all
interesting
do.
you brought that up, and I know you've got a big agenda today, so I can sit here. Your
I
clothes
I
are
think we're
glass
starting to
style,
go on a
but
tangent now.
It's a tangent, I know, but
I actually met with my congressman a couple of weeks ago about we really need to get back to trade schools and workforce development.
what about the apprentice program, the apprentice program? I mean, that's the way we used to do it. It was through
I'll be
apprentice.
glad to speak with anyone
Yeah.
about that, how we can try to help facilitate that.
I mean, I want to know if this is plausible. I know we can reject it later on, but I'll probably be dead by that time. And so I'm
For the
really
record.
interested. I would love to talk to you.
Yes, make sure y'all get each other's phone numbers.
I
For the
will
record,
leave packages about me and my company for all of you. out
if you could
front.
give that to staff and they'll distribute it, but I'm not done. Manufactured housing and modular housing has a rich history in Nelson County, and it houses close to 10% of the population. So I will tell you, it has fed many families and housed many.
And many families would not have homes unless that was done.
Exactly.
But it would be wonderful to employ people to build these houses. And-
They've been
and that
employed
these
in that
people-
industry for a long time as well. But moving on, before we go on tangents about methods of construction, what does the board want to do? We want to refer this to planning commission, Mr. Reed? Or question?
The short answer is yes, but I just have one question. Do you have any, what you would consider an exemplary development that you have done previously that would be good for me to take a look at and see what the cluster development that you have done in a particular
I could
area?
probably come up with
Because-
some ideas.
Because if you have one, it would be interesting, because then it would be possible to find out where it is, and take a look at their zoning and see what they have in place that might be applicable to what we're doing in terms of, you know, whether it would fit or not, I don't know, but it would at least give us, you know, some more information to go off of. So if you could just let me know,
Sure,
you know, that would be something I would like to do, you know, apart from this.
Well, we'd like to see them too.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure that'll all come out in the special use permit too.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead. If there's no more questions, what's the consensus of the board? Send us to the R 2022-64. Do we need to pick one of those specifically, or can we just send it all?
If you adopt the resolution, that sends it to planning commission. Or,
Okay. Can we get a motion?
I don't quite understand. I think I need to understand.
All right, Dylan, you can have a seat now. Thank you, sir. Dylan, can you explain to Skip what we're doing?
so we're looking for you to adopt resolution 2022-64, which, let's see,
Gives it
will
plenty,
refer the cluster housing development to the planning commission for review and development of a report detailing recommendations of amendments, including but not limited to requirements for area and density. Back to
so
you.
we're allowing them to write an ordinance
Yes.
somewhat.
The planning commission, yes.
Right.
And staff.
Okay.
Okay. Any motions?
I'll move that we adopt resolution R 2022-64, Nelson County Board of Supervisors, referring the zoning ordinance, Article 21, cluster housing development, to the Planning Commission for review and recommendations for amendment.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Parr, any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll do a vote by acclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or objections? Hearing none, it passes unanimously. Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you.
All right, in new and unfinished business, the river access at Allen's Creek is no longer on the agenda at this time. So we will move on to authorization of public hearing on proposed amendments to chapter 6. Okay, this is a lot. Candy.
Okay, the next two items are requests for authorizations for public hearings. The two ordinances do kind of work together, albeit the first one is related to the business license ordinance. And this is in 5B, which is the business license amendments, would incorporate short-term rental activities as a business activity, which requires a business license, and updating the business license application process to include a compliance review by the planning and zoning department, building inspections, and VDOT. The need for a registry for short-term rental of property is negated by the business license requirements in this section. We can kind of review here. Mr. Payne worked on these draft ordinances. Let's see here. So here are some housekeeping items where we just updated the definitions or removed some of these definitions of various businesses that are no longer applicable. We have just a kind of a general definition of a business here in this section. Better read it from here. Okay, in the definition of a business, you can see here, we're including ownership of structures held out for transient occupancy, whether by the owner or a person engaged to do so by the owner, including by way of example, bed and breakfast inns, vacation houses, apartments, and the like. This would remove the definition of financial services, peddler at wholesale, professional services, real estate services, and wholesale merchant. Okay, we would then amend section 6-86. Under section D, there is a defunct reference to a state code section here that would come out. Under this section, we would repeal item 8, which references a wholesaler or retailer for the privilege of selling bicentennial metals, et cetera. So we've gotten beyond the bicentennial, so that is being repealed. There's nothing in this section. And then we would add the new section related to the application requirements for a business license. Adding in item B for new businesses or existing businesses which have changed physical location or description. They would also have to get a signature block of approval from planning and zoning, building inspections, and VDOT. And these were changes that both Dylan and Pam Campbell requested in terms of modifying review of business license applications.
So, Dylan, so VDOT gets involved with this? I just I find that interesting. A signature block for Virginia Department of Transportation indicate requirements of that department have been satisfied. So in most cases, if it was residential, would that not really take care of that, or is the VDOT's
Home business.
I guess. I mean, that one's a little bit perplexing to me.
We typically don't require that they have VDOT approval prior to issuing zoning approval. We have that as a disclaimer on our zoning approvals.
Right.
Of course, unless it's like a special use permit or a rezoning
Sure,
where
that's
they're required to review. This would require a review of that. For example, do you remember the special use permit for short-term rentals on Avon Road?
Yes.
That would be a good example because if they had just gotten a business license, they wouldn't have been required to go to VDOT, but they didn't have adequate parking. And their entrance was very wide, so VDOT had required them to close it down a bit and ensure that their access was adequate on the state road.
Okay. The only, I don't know if this is a reasonable concern. I mean, obviously, the contracting industry is huge here. You got guys who operate out of their trucks in, some holla somewhere with their plumbing company or whatever. Would this require them to go to VDOT before they did anything?
I believe that's what this is saying, yes. I personally, with typical zoning approvals, we don't require VDOT approval ahead of time. Like I said, we have a disclaimer about it. As far as planning and zoning is concerned, I don't need the VDOT on a business license. I think that's something that's up to the board.
I'm just curious where the thought process got us to VDOT. That's the only thing I wanted to know.
I'm not sure if
Phil, is
that came from input from Pam Campbell or just.
That draft language is a couple of years old when this problem first came up. I don't know.
Where VDOT?
Put that in there. I mean, you can always make it optional.
Yeah.
Based on the zoning, planning
I think there should be some discretion. I mean, there's no reason to be getting every tiny mom and pop thing to get a VDOT approval, because we would be creating an undue burden on a lot of folks that, like, I'll tell you, there's some folks in Helma that if they found out they had to get VDOT approval to, operate their thing, like, it'd just be kind of insane.
I personally don't have any heartburn over removing the VDOT.
I think we should remove the VDOT.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that would be a little bit intense. If we could, is it, other than that location, is there anywhere else, if we were to strike that, it would need to be stricken? If that's a word.
Don't believe so.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
So I would just advocate, if anyone's gonna make a motion to approve, that we strike the VDOT requirement. Would that verbiage be, would need to be? I think sounds good. Okay. All right, that was my take.
I have a question.
Okay.
Under the definition of business, the area that you highlighted, about ownership of structures held out for transient occupancy. So this would not apply to, existing single-family homes where a portion of the house or a bedroom or something like that is going to be rented out? It only applies to separate structures?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, it appears from my reading that this applies to ownership of structures that are held out. It doesn't say that's exclusively for transient occupancy. But would it apply to transient occupancy, short-term rentals that were a portion of a house that was a residence, that a portion of the residence was being rented out, like a
Like a basement.
yeah, or what do you call it when you put the accessory dwelling? Is that right?
I'm gonna defer to Phil on that, that's your language.
So that's what a bed and breakfast den used to be before it became the octopus that it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could always insert ownership of structures. I don't want to say what portions thereof. We could say down by way of example, bed and breakfast, vacation houses, apartments, rooms, rooms. Bad word rooms. Really, my opinion, bed and breakfast covers it,
Yeah.
but rooms makes you more comfortable. It's always the best way to go. Be more comfortable.
Yeah.
I'd like, because that's considered, transient occupancy, I'd like to see that added and to be clear that that be.
So you're okay with having rooms?
I
for
think so.
Apartments?
I would think so.
Dwelling rooms in the dwelling.
I think I'm of the same mindset as Phil in that the definition of a bed and breakfast is transient occupancy by room. But I also agree to being extra clear with that as well.
Okay. So we got that far. We'll also find out what we need to change after the first year of doing this.
Yeah.
Very quickly. Very, very quickly.
Yeah, and also after we have a public hearing,
Oh, it's a public hearing.
Right.
when people will let us know what they think.
I see.
Yeah, this is
All
just
right.
authorization for a public hearing, but it's good to know.
Yeah,
Advertise for a public hearing.
if you could go back to that list of 4 things, zoning, building, VDOT. The only other thing I could see is a building official having to know whether something can operate there. I would imagine every mechanic shop ever would not be allowed to operate, more than likely, and several other entities. So I would like to get kind of some take from Jeremy on that. We can leave it on there for now, and I guess we can plan on striking some of these at that time period, right? But I would imagine like that would be my next after. I think VDOT, without a doubt, will probably be taken off. But I would definitely ask myself the question on the building official, like what that impact would be like, because every mechanic shop that's been operating since 1962 or whatever could have some. Yes, Phil.
I will to the extent that you will tolerate my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't like this application requirements past subparagraph A.
Yeah,
And my opinion to the various office holders was that our ordinance did not require somebody coming in paying a $30 fee to get a business license to go through this drill.
Mhm.
Therefore, if any of this is required, then we would have to put it in the ordinance.
Right.
I still think you can just imagine people coming in with a very simple business license application and, oh, you gotta go to the zoning, you gotta go see the building official. I think it's overload.
yeah, because I can see the reality of people just getting an LLC and running through the FCC and, never telling us that they have a business in their thing ever.
I know that, I'm sorry, Dylan, but I
Yeah.
just think you're hitting the citizens too hard.
Do you remember I think we had this same conversation, Ernie, like 4 years ago. I think we did, and we killed it then on a similar basis.
Isn't it meant to keep folks from having a business in an area that's not zoned for that?
90% of the businesses in Nelson are in places that aren't zoned business. Probably.
If I'm not mistaken, this was to help prevent that.
Right.
Right.
When the issue came up at a recent hearing about
Short term.
parcel being zoned R1,
Yeah.
and they got a business license without zoning approval, but a special use permit would have been required.
Yeah, see, this is such an interesting thing because if you just go down any hollow ever, I mean, there's every excavating company kind of, parks his equipment in his yard, and it's not necessarily farm, but it also doesn't impact anybody. I think we might be going down a path that could be a little, and we needed, obviously, this would help with short-term rentals, and I don't know how to apply this with short-term rentals, maybe minus the VDOT thing, but yeah, I don't know. I'm a little concerned.
I think, I like subsection, 1 and 2, there you go, I and II, because it just, it would require the applicant to just, check the planning and zoning and building inspector box. And to some extent, I think if you're doing a short-term rental, you're going to assume that the place that you're going to be staying in has building codes, that it's code compliant, you don't, that's an important thing for customers to know when they are, when they're booking a short-term rental. And,
Well, the thing is with code compliant is that every home that was built pre-2018 will not pass 2022 building code, if that makes sense. So they'd have to look at it through the guise of, am I looking at a 1982 house with 1982 visor? Am I looking at that with the 2022 visor? Because anything built prior to this year would not be code compliant, if that makes sense. So and we don't have a maintenance code as a county, which other counties do have, which would probably be more in the ballpark of where your mind is.
well, but this does not, from the way I read it, it does not require that they be compliant. It requires that there be a determination, right?
I don't know. I don't know how with that.
Because it says that there's a signature block. You could say, well, it's not compliant here, but it is here. And then you would have that on file.
My understanding of the building code aspect of it is more for things like number of bedrooms. There's some threshold, whether it's 5 or 6 bedrooms being rented out, kicks it into a new use category.
Yeah, I can see that.
But to your point, if a dwelling was issued a CO, they're not going to be required to bring it up to whatever the current building code is. It's just, hey, I just bought this 10-bedroom house and I want to rent it out as a short-term rental. And then the building office can say, oh, well, now that you've passed 5 or 6 bedrooms, these extra requirements, I think like sprinkling kicks in.
Oh, Lord.
And Jeremy will have to speak more on that because I don't.
I think we're gonna have to get some more info and probably bring Jeremy up on that one too, so we can get some of those questions asked. Probably should get him ready to answer some of those questions,
Um,
because
just,
I think it's a reasonable question, but we need to define compliant.
And this did come up a few years ago, shortly after I started, and on the current business license is a spot for zoning and building. And so the general practice has been internally, we agreed that any ones that were questionable would be forwarded to our office for confirmation.
Right.
This is just putting it in stone to require it in order for the issuance of a business license.
Does this as written require compliance? Or does it require that planning and zoning indicate?
It's in compliance with the zoning.
Yeah, so it's either, so it would be possible for someone to get their license on one that's not compliant, but it would be on record that it's not. Does that
But I
make
don't
sense?
I think if it's not compliant, then you can't get past number 2. Right? You can't be non-compliant and get a license, I would imagine. I mean, that would be my immediate, like, you can't get a business license if you're not compliant. I mean, if you're not satisfying all 4 of those items, in this scenario, you would not be able to get a license. So, I don't know.
That's the distinction, is right now, you could get a business license even if you were not zoning compliant.
Right. And that's been the way for ever and ever and ever.
But this would, this would change it then from giving the Commissioner of Revenue the option to say that planning and zoning should look at this or not. even
It would
if Foxborough
require
would
it.
It would
require
require you to
that
look
go
at
there.
it.
It would require you to look at it.
It would just be, and I'll say it, she's going to be stamping a lot of things non-compliant. Like, we're talking lots and lots and lots.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, the question that I have is that the fact that it's non-compliant, would that eliminate the ability for them to do a short-term rental on
I
it
see what you're
if it's not compliant? And I would submit that, that it shouldn't. Okay, and if that's what we believe, that it shouldn't eliminate them from being able to get a business license on, but we would have on record that it's not compliant. It might, it might do something like, maybe every, maybe they would have to like resubmit every 5 years or something. I don't know, just something, just some way to keep that issue, to keep it from being one that kicked it out of them being able to do it, but still became something that the county was aware of. And therefore,
But if we're aware of it, we're then going to have to enforce it, right? I mean, we'd have to specify, I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. That's the question I have. Like, would that do it? And I don't know. So that's a.
How many non-answers can we get? I would love to see that, what you're talking about, Ernie, with the short-term rental aspect. I think there's a huge value. Like, if we're a short-term rental world, it's got to get approved by planning and zoning, right? It's got to be compliant.
Yeah, the rise on the steps to get upstairs to stay in the bedroom is, a half inch below what the building code says it should be, okay? That doesn't mean that people shouldn't be able to, sleep there or reside there. It just means that it's not compliant, okay?
I just don't see
That's
how,
not a,
I just don't see how
it's
we
not an
can be
issue.
non-compliant and then still allow them to get the license though. If that makes sense. Like, I just have a hard time seeing that you can get, all right, you satisfy A or whatever, B, the first item, and you get to the second item, right? And then you get to the third item, a building official, then all of a sudden we say, but you're not compliant here. Then all of a sudden you still get a license. I just don't see.
Well, it doesn't, if you're not compliant, it doesn't mean that your family can't live there.
Well,
And it doesn't, you don't evict people if it's not compliant, You
I
catch
don't-
my drift?
I'm kind of, I think I'm a little lost, but
I think for the building code part, it's more about the use classification. Like I said, if it's got a CO.
if it's
then
got a
They
CO
already said that all the
Yeah.
code requirements were
at
met.
that time,
Yeah.
yes.
So if a short-term rental comes and says, I want a business license, and they come to us and we say, okay, yes, you're zone A1, here's your approval. They go to the building code office and they say, okay, well, you're a dwelling with 5 bedrooms that you're renting out, and you have a CO.
I don't know,
think another
guys.
potential benefit for my office at least is the home occupation definition is pretty expansive. Like you said, pretty much anyone can get a business license for a lot of uses. So we can approve that. But if somebody just goes to the Commissioner of Revenue and gets a business license and does not get a home occupation permit from us, then we don't have any record of it.
Okay. I just hate to envelop the short-term rental piece with Joe the plumber, right? Like, I'd love to see those two things be differentiated, because I think it's two, because that guy who's just got his plumbing truck and he's got his Class C license, he is not causing any issues anywhere, right? It's, obviously the short-term rental world has its own different issue, and this would have to cover both of those, right, Phil?
So the neighbor calls about the truck leaving at 4 o'clock every night.
Right. And but that's such a cultural thing here. I mean, everybody, and I would venture to say, and this is a concern I think I had years ago, if someone works for an outfit, so to speak, and they drive their truck home, is then all of a sudden he does leave at those hours, right? Or does some preparatory work before he goes to a job site. Is he in a zoning violation?
Well, that's what I was gonna say, was it's not a zoning violation, but then he can say, no, I'm good, I have my zoning approval.
I understand your point, and I think the real question is where to put it. I'm reminded of the noise ordinance, which I regret my part in that. But the fact is, there was gigantic interest in solving one problem.
Yeah.
One landowner's problem, rather than the big picture. So rather than try to twist this one into governing short-term rental, we might want to go either to a zoning definition,
Yeah.
probably a zoning definition that requires, okay, if you're gonna do this.
If you're gonna do a
you
short-term
need
rental-
A, B, C, D.
Hit those three things. I think that makes more sense than trying to make the plumber suffer. Let's do the ordinance thing. Sorry to change everyone's.
Maybe we can also look at options, in fact, you've got public hearing and so forth, maybe some tweaking that wouldn't be so onerous. The
Good.
compliance concept is a good question. I think, I mentioned this, but I think there's a pretty big loophole in the building code. What in effect is short-term rentals? I don't think they have this.
I don't think
They don't
building,
have sprinklers, they don't have
Right.
fire extinguishers, they don't have all that stuff.
no.
But there's some sort of cutoff. Probably 89% of the people in Nelson County are violating the building code. Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, today's standard, everyone's in violation, right? If you have a house that's built last year, then congratulations, your house that you're now in would be in violation of that code.
I do recommend that before it go to public hearing, no matter,
Sure.
at whatever state, that we kind of have some justification for what's in it. And don't just throw it out there and say, well, whatever, we'll see what we get. It would be better, I think, to have something that was a little bit more thought out and a little tighter.
What we're trying to
That
do
reflects
is
this,
we
yeah.
want to identify short-term rentals.
Yeah.
That's what
Candy?
we should be trying to do.
I was just gonna say,
And to get into other things.
I mean, we don't have to proceed to public hearing with this particular section. You could say, no, we don't want to do that right now, and just take it off completely for the moment.
Okay.
I mean, I think the crux of this is to establish, short-term rentals.
Okay.
in the business definition.
So we
Yeah.
can just eliminate that whole page, right? And then pass everything else.
Right.
All right.
So you could just say, yes,
All right.
we don't want to do this part.
And then
Let's
we'll
everything
send the rest to a
else
public
except
hearing.
for This to public hearing.
All right. I
We
think,
can consider the application requirements when we have our meeting on the.
right. We
short-term
can
rental
talk about that. That'd be a
people.
good time for us to talk about the
Okay.
ordinance side.
What Phil said to begin with?
That is what Phil
I
said.
think so.
All
So
right.
Isn't that what Phil said to begin with?
Someone, make a motion and strike that page.
I move it.
All right.
Move
He
to strike
moved
that page.
He moved to strike the page and send this to public hearing with everything else.
Okay, so you have a resolution to
Oh, yeah,
consider?
Yeah.
And we can just strike that out of the resolution.
and this is 66, right? Or-
Removing, adding new section 6-90.
All right, so we need a motion to send R 2022-66 to public hearing while striking new section 6-90.
Yes.
Do we have a motion for that?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Park, do we have a second?
Second.
Second for Mr. Parr. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll do vote by acclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or objections? Hearing none. There we go. That item's done. Now the next one.
These sort of dovetails attempt to solve some of the confusion that the state code had essentially created for us in this temporary occupancy and business license and taxation. So these two things work hand in hand. This first amendment that you just recommended for hearing was to make clear that everybody has to sign up as a pro-business license and just take all the exceptions out of it. Super confusing. So, that also allows us to get rid of the rental registry, which was a real headache. And it was really overlapping with the business license. So makes all that one step. In the taxing angle, where there has been problems, at least according to me, is that third parties handling the rental of these short-term rentals would not disclose which piece of property was generating such and such a sum of money. And while I think our existing ordinance had enough teeth to pursue those people, I added additional language, which is in the 11-133, when taxes are remitted by a person other than the owner of the hotel, and hotel is a defined term, the accompanying report shall list each owner's name and property address and the amount of the remittance each. And that's for the purposes of making sure you're capturing all of these, capturing the income. And it is somewhat of an honor system, but at least if people have to disclose, okay, this came from property A, property B, property C, we see that those properties are being advertised, so we know money, taxation dollars are coming from those
Right.
properties.
And that's in compliance and in the new state stipulations as they apply to the Airbnb, those things about how they report taxes. Right.
And this, so this is, we ran into an issue with third-party entities, people using those third-party entities as the people who have the business license, right? So I have short-term rental and I hire you to do it. I haven't been required, or justifiably, the person who owns that building hasn't been having to get that permit, a business license, because they say, well, such and such entity has the business license.
Okay.
What this allows is for that person who also owns that building to also need to get a business license, which I wholeheartedly support and think it's, I mean, I appreciate everyone's non-interest in paying $30. But at the same time, I think this would be very helpful for us in knowing who's what, who owns what. And, there's nothing wrong with anybody using a third party entity to run their stuff. I even resemble that, but I also think everybody should be paying for their.
Well, plus we're getting rid of the registers, so.
Right.
Some people will eliminate whatever fee was being charged for that.
Right.
But the violations penalty, the commissioner can require specific information from these third-party operations. If they don't provide the breakdown, then guidance is go get a summons, go to court, it's a criminal offense for failure to provide information prescribed and required by the commission. These people will just have to say which landowners they are collecting these tax dollars. It's not trying to be bad guys, we just need to make sure things are being done. So that's the goal there.
All right.
So then there's some other housekeeping things.
That's good.
Registry's gone.
Review there.
The state code provision of enabling that is so convoluted.
Right.
I don't even know why they bothered to pass it.
Yeah.
So, I don't know why we bothered. Let's get rid of it.
And then let's see. Hotel here is where we added bed and breakfast in vacation house. That's other items in the hotel definition. That compares to the business license. Ordinance.
Is there a definition for bed and breakfast inn?
Is that the owner lives there thing?
There may be a definition in the zoning ordinance for
Bed
that.
and breakfast, I don't know if inn is in the definition in zoning.
So
I mean, it's in this ordinance
Say bed and breakfast,
definitions.
last one.
Anywhere, like
Yeah,
what?
It's in 11-130 under hotel. It mentions bed and breakfast, vacation house.
Yeah, but is there a definition of what a bed and breakfast
Oh,
is?
I got you.
Is
Well,
that-
There is in the zoning ordinance, but it doesn't include the word in.
Oh, okay.
I think, well, remember, this is separate from zoning ordinance, but I think everybody knew what a bed and breakfast was back in the old impression.
So to make
It's short-term rental, if it's short-term rental, it's, reading these things together, it sort of describes itself.
Yeah.
Or other lodging places, again, often lodging, defined in the section for compensation to any transient. I'm comfortable with that.
Excellent. This is just going to a public hearing as well, right?
Right, this is just authorized in public hearing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm fine with that, and I'm sure we'll get plenty of commentary from that to tell us what we did wrong.
Okay, so you have resolution 2022-67 would authorize this to go to public hearing.
All right, anybody have any commentary before we make a motion? All right, let's make a motion.
I so move.
Moved. All right, second, any discussion here? No discussion, vote by acclamation. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstention, check? None? Thank you. All right, reports, Candy.
First thing not on my report is just want to acknowledge Veterans Day at the end of this week and thank all of our veterans for their service. You may notice on the courthouse lawn, we have some green light bulbs in our lighting out front, and that's just to commemorate Veterans Day. All right. And most of you are aware of where we are with our comprehensive plan, but for the public, the project website is www.nelson2042.com. First of four scheduled joint work sessions of Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission was held on October 25th, 2022. Results of the public engagement efforts along with the draft Chapter 1 layout was discussed. Chapter 1, creating our guide, includes sections on the legal basis for the comprehensive plan, planning jurisdiction, relationship to other plans and policies, process of the creation of the plan, and community engagement summary. The community engagement results and the presentation from the first work session can be found on the project website under Documents-Library. Subsequent joint meetings with the Planning Commission will be held on January 18th, March 15th, and May 17th of 2023. The Larkin Property Acquisition and Development, another Board of Supervisors work session is to be scheduled in November, and at that time, the aggregated public input from the comprehensive plan process can be considered, as well as follow-up from the first work session. Supervisors will be asked at the conclusion of today's meeting to discuss adjourning and continuing to a date in the last week of November for this work session. Home American Rescue Plan ARP program. The TJPDC will receive $2.4 million in these funds, of which each member jurisdiction will receive $347,000, roughly $405. The county may choose to administer these funds itself, pool funding with another member jurisdiction, or partner with a current home subrecipient such as Nelson County Community Development Foundation. These funds must be used to benefit individuals or families from the following qualifying populations. That would be the homeless, those at risk of homelessness, those fleeing or attempting to flee domestic, dating, or sexual violence and or human trafficking and stalking, other populations experiencing housing instability, and veterans or families of veterans that meet one or more of those criteria. The PDC's consultant has provided data regarding gaps in service and needs for these populations. The next step is for each locality in the PDC to decide how its funding will be used. Staff has been meeting with the PDC staff and Community Development Foundation staff to outline a plan, which will be consulted on with other stakeholders prior to presenting something for the board's consideration at the December board meeting. The TJPDC will assemble the draft funding allocation plan and conduct a public comment period prior to submission of the plan to HUD in early March of 2023. And a voluminous material is attached as background information with this report. Basically, we just need to decide the eligible populations we want to focus on and prioritize the eligible activities. It doesn't have to be a very detailed plan to go into the overall allocation plan submitted to HUD at this point. And these funds are to be expended before September 30th of 2029. The Regional Library Agreement Review Committee met. This is done every 5 years with the members of the Regional Library are tasked with reviewing the regional agreement. A meeting of the member localities and the library director, David Plunkett, was held on November 3rd to conduct an initial review. Most discussion centered around whether or not to continue to charge a $30 out-of-area fee for those who wish to check out books and live outside of the region. In FY22, the total out-of-area fees collected were $6,120 for Nelson. That was in total for the region, and then for Nelson, it was $60. There was some concern that this fee represents a barrier to access, and it presents a customer service issue for library staff. Another item of interest was equal representation of members on the library board. Charlottesville and Albemarle each have 3 members, or 3 representatives. Nelson, Louisa, and Greene each have 1. Other items discussed were of a housekeeping nature, and another meeting will be scheduled, and the resulting agreement as proposed will be brought back to the boards of each members for approval. So I don't know if anyone has any comment or thoughts on the out-of-area fee or anything else.
Is the out-of-area outside of the Thomas Jefferson Regional Library District, or is it outside of Nelson?
Outside of the regional library.
Right, so if you
District.
live in Charlottesville,
Mhm.
you don't have to pay a fee to check out in Nelson.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank
Okay.
you.
Emergency medical services licensure. Every 2 years in October, our emergency medical service agencies reapply for licensure and are inspected by the State Virginia Department of Health prior to recertification. All agencies have passed inspection with follow-up items required except for Gladstone Volunteer Fire and Rescue Services, whose EMS agency license and vehicle permits were extended through the end of November. And this is pending completion of a list of agency follow-up items provided by the state inspector at their preliminary inspection. So they're working diligently to complete these action items in order to get recertified as a transport agency. The Virginia Department of Forestry Sustainability Grant, the 2022 General Assembly established this grant fund of $1 million administered by the Virginia Department of Forestry. Localities with forest use value assessment may apply for an allocation from the fund to help offset lower or foregone tax revenue. The county has submitted its application through the BDOF online web portal, showing approximately $2.9 million in foregone revenue from forested land and land use. BDOF will review the applications and make distributions to localities from the fund based upon their proportional share of the total applications received. So we don't really have any idea how much that could be at this point. An update on the Gladstone Depot TAP grant. The Friends of Gladstone Depot provided the board and staff with the appraisal report on the depot building, with the as-is appraisal being $80,000. Staff spoke with Mr. Jay Brown, Director of Program Management in Lynchburg, in the Lynchburg VDOT office regarding a couple of items he wanted to address before moving forward with establishing the draft agreement with the VDOT central office. Mr. Brown said that while the current award was for phase 1 of the project with its 20% local match commitment, the VDOT grant agreement would reflect a local obligation of the remainder of the total project estimate. He said that even though the project was phased, each phase was not considered a standalone project, and recipients were committed to completion of the project as a whole within a 10 to 20 year period, regardless of how the balance was funded. He noted that if not completed, any VDOT funds would have to be paid back by year 20. He added that since the county didn't have a staff member that had completed the requisite FHWA training, if the board was willing to commit to the local difference, he could work with the county VDOT to administer this grant. So I'd like to suggest, I guess, that we advise Mr. Brown to have the agreement drafted by central office and provided to the county for the board's formal consideration once it's received. And then in the meantime, we can have some meetings with Mr. Brown and Friends of Gladstone and possibly Mr. Barton and whoever else may be interested in participating in such a meeting. So I guess I would like some advisement on that suggestion from the board.
Go forward.
Any questions on that? Kind of a lot.
Yeah, it'd be good. We keep Candy busy, guys. I think, that's fine. We do have to have the overarching conversation about the completion of the project. I mean, that's $2.5 million in the event we can't find any other money. It's important the county understands that. We have to find an additional $2.5 million to complete or something like that.
Right, whatever the balance is between the project estimate and the funding.
Yeah, that's the only thing I want us to understand is that we're not just committing to this. It's if they can't do it, we're going to be owning a depot and figuring out where $2.5 million is coming from.
20 years.
We hope.
Yeah.
$2.5 million turns into $10 million in 20 years
No.
with inflation. Never mind, you ain't tracking inflation. That's all right.
I mean, it would be a long-term commitment. It's just something
Yeah.
we need to consider and
I mean,
go forward.
I like to say something. We went down to talk to Joanne, and I haven't been in Gladstone proper since my election, and it looks a lot better. And also checked out the state park on the other side of the river, and that is a lot of activity.
It's a busy place.
And there is, there's hope for Gladstone, and it is, and I rode around there, and it's really kind of nice. It's very nice, and the potential for a good outcome in Gladstone is there. And Gladstone has always been so separate from Nelson County. I think it behooves us to support something like this.
I support it. I think it's a good idea for our areas outside, you know. So let's go ahead. You just need a consensus for that, right?
Yes.
All right. Ernie, you good?
I'm good.
Mr. Farr?
Yep.
Pardon?
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
So once we have the agreement in place, then it'll be brought back for our formal decision on whether or not to sign the agreement.
Great.
All right, we have a report from PMA Architecture and Timmons on the new office building, so I'll skip over that. The Department of Justice Adult Drug Court Grant, the grant award of $699,640 in Department of Justice grant funds for the implementation of the adult drug court in Nelson County has been accepted in the system. The required local match for this grant over 4 years is $309,696, of which about 60.5% or approximately $187,296 will be in-kind match, and the remaining $122,400 will be cash match. So that's less cash match than what was previously reported, I believe. So it's partial in-kind and partial cash over 4 years. County administration and finance staff will continue to meet with the Commonwealth Attorney staff on budgeting and implementation going forward. Initial plans include establishing a memorandum of understanding with OAR, who's Offender Aid Restoration, for the administration of the grant funds and the drug court. And this is how it's done in Fluvanna County. Or will be facilitating the hiring of a drug court coordinator for Nelson as well. The Commonwealth Attorney staff is planning to provide an update to the board at either December or January regular meeting. So I think there, in talking to Will Flory, he was interested in maybe getting consensus of the board to go ahead and proceed with authorizing OAR to advertise and hire the drug court coordinator for Nelson as soon as possible. We would have to get that MOU in place, but he was hoping maybe we could get in the sense that they could go ahead with the coordinator hire prior to working out those details.
What's our time frame on the drug court? Like a year?
I'm not sure how long that might take. I think that's something that the Commonwealth Attorney's Office would
I think it's at least a year.
report on.
I was just curious for the time frame. If we're gonna give the
Yeah.
general consensus to hire a OAR person, you know, what time frame? I mean, it might take a year to hire someone like that.
I think the hire can be made pretty quickly, to be honest. I think
Yeah.
they may have someone kind of already in mind to
Um,
talk to.
I just had a question about the in-kind match. Is that services that the Commonwealth Attorney would provide that,
Yes.
that it wouldn't be duplicative, you know?
Be a lot of their salaries and benefits, some of the circuit court people's salaries and benefits. We would have to provide an office space, which has been identified as the old jury room. I don't know if any of you remember that room. It has a bathroom in it so that there could be drug testing. If that's monitored by the coordinator, that would be in that space. So that's part of it as well. Okay, moving on to short-term rentals, our favorite topic. A meeting invite has been sent out to the overall work group for November 30th. The subject of the meeting is planned to be short-term rental tax collection, reporting, and enforcement. The group includes 3 members of the short-term rental community: Commissioner of Revenue, myself, Maureen Kelly, Dylan Bishop, Supervisor Reed, and Planning Commissioner Hauschner. We'll have an update by Commissioner of Revenue Campbell on this process, including recent changes to the third-party tax collection and remittance. And today you all already considered authorizing public hearings on some amendments related to transient occupancy tax and business license. We have no new information to report on the Renaissance Ridge housing development. And then you all should have received other departmental staff reports with your packet.
Okay, any questions for Candy?
One thing, going back to emergency medical services licensure.
Right.
Do we have any county emergency services coordinator, anybody working with Gladstone or someone from the council, or what's going on with making sure that that November 30th deadline, and then if it is not successful, do we have a plan in place, and what are we gonna do?
Right, yes, we do have somebody working with them. Up to this point, it's been, Curtis Sheets has really kind of taken a leadership role with this. Sort of, at my, I don't know if request is the right word, but just in order to help me with knowing we didn't have an emergency services coordinator. So he's been working with them to get them going in the right direction. I don't think there's gonna be a problem with them meeting that deadline. So I think we'll just cross that bridge when we get there. I'm monitoring it too, because they have to submit all those forms to me.
So it seems like they've come a long way in the last few months, because I know there were
They have.
concerns
Yes.
about them not.
Right, there were a lot of concerns. They had a meeting, with Curtis, and I think they all got on the same page. And I think he was able to help them, get moving in the right direction, and we should be able to meet this deadline.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank
Mhm.
Any other questions for Candy? Thank you, Candy. All right, board report, Skip. Ernie.
I have one. I met with one of our joint board of director representatives, Diane McNaught, and with Danny Harris, who coordinates the senior center at the Nelson Center, for the senior activities. We got together to talk about the reduced services that John's providing to the Nelson Center at this point. And also to look at the proposals for the comp plan about what we would like to see in terms of services, at the very least, a return to what had been provided at the beginning of this fiscal year, but also looking at some of the services that we once enjoyed with John that we don't any longer for various reasons, mostly funding. So I don't know, Candy, if I got back with you on this, but one of the things that Ms. McNaught brought up was that she had said there was something about a 30-70% split for services, that the county pays 30% and John does the extra 70%. It sounded way too simplistic for me to take that on face value, but it might actually be the case. I'm not really sure. But I know come budget season, we'll be talking about, how much money for how many services we'll be getting from John. So we did not talk about a future meeting, but it would be good for us to come to some realization about what it might look like this budget season, but also for the future in terms of some of the things that the comp plan might reflect we would like to see in the county and what that might cost us in the future to be able to do that. So that we at least had that meeting, which was good. And that's just about it, I think.
Okay, Mr. Barr.
Didn't have any committee meetings, but nothing to report anyway. Met with the Department of Social Services, but nothing to report here. But I did have a good meeting with a few members of the community. I know a lot of you all have met with the same group, Susan and Woody and Wisteria, and had some good notes come out of that and some information I'll share, working on some bullet points to share with Ms. McGarry. But other than that, that's it.
Kenny, is Joe meeting Thursday?
Great. Board reports, we had a PDC meeting, it was great. We have Regional Housing Partnership, which is wrapping up, which reminds me, I wanted to know, we have a lot of great speakers coming to the Regional Housing Partnership this coming March. Obviously, this board is invited, as well as our staff and planning and zoning, and we hope you all can attend to see our speakers. Putting my plug in right now, so I'll say I can do this now because we're going to be going to directors in a second. Would Nelson County Board of Supervisors be willing to contribute $1,000 to the Regional Housing Partnership Convention for our stuff? It's about
What do you
affordable
think?
housing. I think it's worth it. It would be great to show our support. It would get us in the door. And Margaret, are y'all going to contribute? I was gonna get 1,000 a day and then you do 500. Okay. I think it's worth it, guys. I think it'd be great. It would give us a lot of tickets in there too. And it'd show Nelson's commitment to figuring out the affordable housing conversation. I think that'd be good.
How is that comparable to what other localities?
Most localities were asking $1,000. I think Albemarle and Charlottesville they're looking to contribute more than that, obviously, but they have a different issue. But like Fluvanna and Louisa, they've all been asked, and I think there should be letters going out also. But I think we'd be good trendsetters. But if the board wants to do less or more, Yeah, we did it. We did 1,000. It wasn't last year. It'd be 19. Yeah. We didn't do that. We didn't donate to the virtual.
I have no objection.
All right, you're fine with $1,000?
Yeah.
David, you all right with 1,000? You all right with 1,000? I'm all right with 1,000. You could let Ian Baxter know. All right, that's good. I did my part there. And then I do have, I guess I'll just say this for directives later with a new thing. So moving on to appointments, we did have one guy looking to get appointed to BZA, Gerald Sanford. The only thing I wanted to note on his application is he did not check the box whether he was a Nelson, if he lived in Nelson or not. He had an address, but he didn't check yes or no for if he lived here. And he's your district too. Do you know him?
What does PG mean?
What did you
I
say?
mean, Gerald Sanford, PG.
Professional. Professional geologist, probably.
Geology, I'm in there.
Pretty good.
The only thing I would say is we could appoint this person. I would like to, see if they lived in Nelson. Keep in mind.
Well, it says home address.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, Arrington.
Oh, okay. I didn't even look up there. Mr. Barton, he's in your district. What do you think?
Yes,
Well, why don't you make a motion?
I make a motion, we appoint Gerald Sanford, PG, to the
Specifically.
Board of Zoning Appeals.
Great. We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Second. Any discussion here? No discussion. Let's do vote by acclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Any other appointments we need to know about, Amanda?
I'd like, so I guess Mary Cunningham has been reappointed.
She would like to be
Oh,
reappointed.
Okay. I
We
would,
do have, Java has also asked that we please do appoint her as well.
right, this is the advisory council, this is not the board.
Right.
Correct.
Make a
Yeah,
motion.
I move that we reappoint Mary Cunningham
Motion.
to the Java Advisory Council.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Second from Mr. Barton. Any discussion? No discussion. Vote by acclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions, objections? None. Great. Correspondence, Mr. Barton?
Nope.
Mr. Reed?
Nope.
Mr. Parr?
No.
I got fun correspondence. I got a letter from anonymous people.
Yeah, me too.
We all did.
We all did?
Yeah.
All right. You got an email on it. The League of Concerned Citizens. I really appreciate the title, but I just
Not
wanted,
dated, not signed.
not dated, not signed, no
address.
postmark. So,
We're pretty fast in the round, probably.
so good there. Moving on to directives, Mr. Barton, Mr. Reed, Mr. Parr.
Well, there is, when are we gonna schedule our meeting on
Larkin property.
recreation?
Yeah, so we were actually going to talk about that probably at this point. Candy and I talked about, we have one meeting, which is short-term rental dominated on the 30th. We had discussed doing something on the 29th of November. If y'all could look at your calendars, Candy and I.
What day is that?
That is a Tuesday. Tuesday, I think that's a reasonable thing.
What time?
That's what we're gonna discuss right now. How do y'all feel about it afternoonish thing?
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock, is that okay with you, Candy? Or is that too late? Or is it too early?
It's okay for me, I don't know about.
3 o'clock. 3 o'clock.
It'd be nice to get a good work day in. What'd you say, Amanda?
If we make it 3 o'clock, it'll be the same time as the short-term rental, and then we're less likely to get confused.
That's true. All right, 3 o'clock.
Three.
So you guys good with that? So
So
before,
the 29th, 3 o'clock.
yes, that's the next Larkin.
And that's recreation.
If you guys could, David, maybe correspond with,
Could we
With-
change that to 3:30? Could we do that?
why?
Because I have something to do.
Let's go back to 4 o'clock then. I ain't doing any 30s.
Okay.
4 o'clock.
So I'm at 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
So this would be a continued.
At the end of our meeting, at the evening session, we'd continue it to then. Yeah,
Because it would be a full board work session.
correct.
Invited,
Old boardroom?
yes, sir.
4 o'clock. And so we'll make sure we do that, continue at the end of our evening session.
Is this just recreation? Is that what we're talking about?
Larkin property at large.
Oh, it's all Larkin property.
But,
Gotcha.
I was going to suggest that Mr. Barton and Mr. Parr, if you could maybe shoot Mr. Drumheller and Jerry West the email about doing a tour of the property yourselves. Or you already did it?
Talked to him.
And just for the record, it is not a tour that you do in your Jeep like I thought it was. You're actually walking. So
Yeah.
Just be prepared if you go, Mr. Barton. It is a
Well,
walking.
I knew
tour.
that.
Malcolm, you want Malcolm, right?
No, not Malcolm.
You want
Matthew?
Yes.
Matthew. Well, yeah, Matthew verbally took me on a tour.
Oh, good. Wonderful.
Because you all participated
We did.
in his little thing,
We
right?
did. We did. It was a very good tour. So I'm going to probably go take another tour with Jerry West. So I might drag one of y'all with me.
I'd like to go on that. too.
Fool
You
me
can't,
once.
Candace, huh?
I said fool me once.
Full you want to come? All right. Mr. Reed and I will take you all and Jerry on our hike.
Just let me know when.
Maybe we'll find some more lions.
Push that walking road.
Today or tomorrow, maybe, if you're looking for lions.
That was the last couple of days.
Well,
Yeah,
it's gonna
before
get cold.
freezes.
It's gonna
Yeah,
get cold.
that's fair.
Tomorrow would be great.
Okay, other than that, I do have an exciting thing I need to bring up other than getting engaged. I recently went into contract on 571 Front Street, which is a building rich history for my father. He had bought it from the county back in the early 2000s, which later became my brother's law firm. And I'm hoping to potentially be bringing some of my businesses into the basement of that facility. This is the county registrar's building, so this puts me into conflict of interest in regards to the lease with the county in reference to the registrar. So I'm making a public statement that I need to abstain from any discussions related to the lease and any negotiations from my county capacity related to that lease. So I have provided the guidance that I received from the state, the Council of Ethics and Conflicts. I also sent you guys an email earlier today referencing it. Mr. Payne does have that exact guidance as well in case there's anything further. Hopefully I'll be closing on the property within the next month and a half. So,
Is that where you're gonna live with your new bride?
yeah, in the basement.
From the church.
I think I'm gonna get murdered upon exit by her if I do that. But Phil, I don't think there's anything else I need to disclose that you can think of. So if you guys have any questions, please correspond with the county attorney and staff on this one. So thank you all. And I'm excited to hopefully be moving my mother's real estate firm into one of the rooms in the basement. Should be a huge piece for my family history. So that is what I got there for my directive. Closed session. Oh, yes.
Yeah, direct, I just want to acknowledge and say something, I'm sure everybody has kept up with, and not to overstep our bounds, but just for us to be aware of everything that's been going on at the high school, middle
Oh,
school
yeah.
complex.
Right.
And the situations that we've had Friday and then rolling over into today. I would just like for maybe our staff to kind of reach out across the hall and just say hey and just have a conversation and I don't know what
You would.
but I do think it would be good for us to acknowledge and offer anything we can offer. I don't know. They, obviously, none of them were here today. They had a pretty busy day with all that, so.
Yeah, I did, see Dr. Arzinski and Crystal Choate earlier today, and did have a conversation with them about it.
Yeah.
But,
And, you know, I know there's a lot of emotion in the community with, you know, what's the right thing to do, and then balancing that with what's realistically effective, you know, and so I know that's gonna be hard, some hard conversations they're gonna be having at their next board meeting. So, you know, it's easy for us as a community to say, we want this, this, and this, when the data and the statistics might not agree that this perceived solution is the right solution for the problem, and is it effective or not? So it's a lot of information that they need to review and discuss, and hopefully the community will be understanding, and the school division will be understanding of the community's concerns. So, thank you.
I agree. All right, is that all the directives?
Yep.
All right, going to closed session. Mr. Reed, this is your job specifically.
Oh, I would move that the Nelson County Board of Supervisors convene in closed session to discuss the following as permitted by Virginia Code Sections 2.2-3711. Consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members pertaining to actual litigation where such consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body. That is litigation pertaining to Region 2000 services.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Second for Mr. Parr. Any discussion? Let's do a roll call vote.
Mr. Barton,
Yes.
Mr. Parr,
Yes.
Mr. Reed.
Yes.
Mr. Buckley.
Yes. All right.
What's the hike you're talking about?
Larkin property.
Oh, Lord.
That's it.
Yeah, I did. I showed up trailers in my Jeep. Because you know the road, that little pullover behind the bus garage? I thought that was a road. If you pull that property up on, like Google, it shows a road going all the way to Stevens Cove. I just thought it was an old logging road. I got a Jeep.
That's awesome.
Go for a ride. We're going for a walk. Like I was the wrong street.
We're close to making it, right? There is a road, so.
Just needs a little bit.
Did you see the mining?
Yeah. Did you hear Candy followed up? And,
Yeah, on the mineral.
Yeah, that there's no
There's nobody
outstanding
found
mineral.
anything. It's a good move.
Yeah,
That'd have been intriguing.
I know.
This is, you don't have to read this now, it's just for later if you want, but this is, how their cost of service proposal, should we leave the authority and how that would be handled. As proposed. Yes, sir.
There it is.
Title of modified